Have you ever stopped to wonder if the things you believe are morally right, I mean, truly deep down right, are maybe just a product of where and when you grew up? That's the core question behind moral relativism, and it's a huge idea that really shakes the foundations of our values. So let's dive in and see just how deep this challenge goes.
Okay, let's just take a practice like polygamy. In some societies, it's a completely normal, even encouraged way to structure a family. But in others, it's seen as fundamentally wrong and it's against the law. And here's the thing, both sides are absolutely convinced they're correct. This isn't just a simple disagreement over facts, it's a head-on clash of core moral beliefs.
And this really sets up the central dilemma perfectly, doesn't it? When you have these deeply held, conflicting moral codes, who's right? Is one side correct and the other mistaken? Or, and this is the big one, is it possible there's no single universal right answer at all? This is the very question that has kept philosophers busy for centuries.
All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start by looking at the evidence for all this moral disagreement. Then we'll unpack the relativist answer to it. After that, we'll get into the major challenges to that view, look for some possible middle ground, and finally, we'll talk about what all this means for a big idea like tolerance.
Okay, first up, a world of moral disagreement. This is really the observation from the real world that gets this whole philosophical debate started.
I mean, when you look at the work of anthropologists and historians, the diversity in moral beliefs across different cultures is just staggering. We see these huge differences on everything from arranged marriages to whether suicide can be an honorable act. And it's not just about specific practices. You see these bigger fundamental clashes, like cultures that put the community's well-being first versus those that prioritize individual rights. These aren't small differences in opinion. They are deep, widespread disagreements about the right way to live.
So how in the world are we supposed to make sense of all this disagreement? Well, that brings us to Section 2, the relativist's answer. This offers a very powerful, though pretty controversial way of looking at the problem.
So first we have to get a key distinction down. There's something called descriptive moral relativism, or DMR. Honestly, this is just a fancy term for what we've been talking about. It's the simple, factual claim that, hey, different societies have different moral codes. It's not saying who's right or wrong. It's just observing that this variety exists. And, looking at the evidence, most people would agree with that.
But then comes the big philosophical leap. This is meta-ethical moral relativism, or MMR. And this is where things get really interesting. MMR doesn't just describe what is, it makes a huge claim about what morality means. It says that the truth of a moral statement isn't absolute. It's actually relative to a specific culture or group. So it's not just that people believe different things are right, it's that different moral truths can actually exist at the same time. Let's bring this back to our example then. According to this view, the statement polygamy is morally wrong isn't just true or false, period. It can be literally true for someone in one society, and at the very same time, be literally false for someone in another. And there's no higher court of appeal, no universal rulebook to decide which one is really correct.
Now, this might seem like a neat and tidy way to resolve all those disagreements, right? Well, maybe a little too neat. That brings us to our third section, challenges to relativism. Because as you can imagine, philosophers have pointed out some pretty serious problems with this idea.
Yeah, critics bring up some really tough questions. For example, if something is only true for my group, am I even really disagreeing with you? Or are we just kind of talking past each other? And what exactly counts as a group anyway? My country? My religion? What if I belong to a bunch of different groups and their values conflict? And maybe the biggest one, if every moral code is equally valid, how do you explain moral progress, like the abolition of slavery? The very idea of progress implies moving toward a better standard, not just a different one.
And this is where we hit what is, for most people, the most powerful and intuitive objection. It's that gut feeling that some things are just wrong. Full stop. Not wrong for us, but universally, objectively wrong. For a pure relativist, the moral code of Nazi Germany would have to be considered true for them. And that's a conclusion that frankly most of us find impossible to accept.
What's really interesting, though, is that when researchers have actually studied what regular people think, the picture gets pretty muddy. It turns out a lot of us are kind of all over the map. We might be total objectivists about something like robbery, thinking it's always wrong, but then be way more relativistic when it comes to a different issue, like abortion. Our moral intuitions just aren't that consistent.
This complexity actually leads us perfectly into our next section, searching for a middle ground. Because maybe this whole debate isn't just a simple all-or-nothing choice between pure relativism and pure objectivism. Yeah, a number of philosophers have tried to develop what they call mixed positions. The whole idea is to take the most compelling parts of both sides of the argument and try to build a more nuanced, more sophisticated view of how morality actually works.
A really great example of this is David Wong's theory of pluralistic relativism. He argues that, yeah, there are some universal constraints that any good morality has to follow. It has to help society cooperate, it has to let people flourish. These things are based on facts about our shared human nature. But, and this is the key, these big rules don't lead to just one single moral code. He argues that different cultures can create very different but still totally valid moralities that get the job done. So what you end up with is a kind of pluralism. More than one true morality can exist.
So the bottom line for these middle ground theories is this. Objective facts about being human kind of set the boundaries. They rule certain things out of bounds, like a morality that just promotes total chaos would be invalid. But within those boundaries, there's a whole lot of room for a variety of different, valid moral systems to thrive.
All right, let's finally tackle the big, real-world question here. What about tolerance? If you accept some form of relativism, does that mean you have to just grit your teeth and accept every single practice out there no matter how much you disagree with it?
Well, this brings up a really fascinating split between the cold, hard logic and the psychological reality. Philosophically speaking, relativism does not logically force you to be tolerant. Why? Well, if all values are relative, then the value of tolerance is just another relative value. A culture could decide that being intolerant is morally right, and a relativist would have to say, okay, that's true for them. But psychologically, things look different. Studies actually show a correlation. People who lean towards relativism also tend to have more tolerant attitudes.
And just so we're clear, when we talk about tolerance here, this is what we mean. It's not about being indifferent or saying you approve of something. It's about having a conscious policy of not interfering with actions that are based on moral beliefs that you completely reject, especially when there's no clear way to rationally settle the score.
Which leaves us with one last, pretty challenging thought to chew on. This whole debate over relativism really pushes us to examine the very ground our own values are built on. If there isn't one single, universally true morality out there, does that make our own convictions weaker? Or could it call for a different kind of conviction altogether? One that's still deeply held, but also humble enough to acknowledge that there might be more than one right way to live a good life?